Good evening. Welcome to Street Talk. As you know, Father Russ is out on sabbatical, but he's out supporting us. I know he's supporting me in his thoughts and prayers as far as my campaign goes. And I guess we'll all figure out, because we're recording on a Monday, whether I got a different title underneath my name or if I'm just going back to being a regular old advocate. But since we are moving past the municipal elections, and we're looking forward to our next year's elections, we're going to have a whole series of different people who are going to be running for a governor coming up and a lieutenant governor. And the first person I have up from the Republican side is a good friend of mine, Dave Walker.
Dom,
Dave,
good to be with you. Thank you for the
coming
opportunity.
out here.
Good to see you.
I know I met you probably about 3 years ago when you were out on the campaign trail with John McKinney, and you were running for lieutenant governor at the time. And I said, you know what? Here's a guy who knows about the economy.
Yes, I do, and unfortunately, it's not good news for Connecticut. Yeah,
Well,
right.
there's plenty to deal with
Right.
on that one. But I have to ask the question, because that's
Sure.
always the first question.
Sure.
Why are you running for governor?
Well, the reason I'm running is because my wife and I moved to Connecticut 8 years ago with the idea that we would end up retiring here. We don't have family here, and frankly, Connecticut is not millennial friendly, retiree friendly, or business friendly. In the 8 years that we've lived here, our home value's gone down 35%. Our property taxes have gone up 55%. The state has had several large tax increases. Its financial condition is terrible. And so my wife and I had a conversation about, do we want to fight or do we want to flee? And we've decided to fight. I have a background that I believe is uniquely suited to be the next governor of the state of Connecticut, to try to lead a turnaround, to create a better future in the state. And so I'm running to, frankly, be able to retire in the state. But the only way that I can retire in the state is if a lot of tough choices are made. A Democrat can't do it because they're largely owned by the public employee unions. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. And secondly, a traditional politician won't do it. And somebody that doesn't have significant experience making real change happen in government won't know how to do it. So right person, right place, right time to try to help create a better future.
Well, now, and I want to take away some of the misconceptions that people have about you. Number one, where do you live?
I live in the Black Rock section of Bridgeport, Connecticut. So some people say, well, here's another white guy from Fairfield County, you know, and some people have asserted that I'm from Greenwich, which I'm not, okay? I'm not wealthy. I am white. And I do live in Fairfield County, but quite frankly, Bridgeport is quite a bit different than the rest of Fairfield County.
They are, and I know on several times you've offered out to them help
I have.
and extended a hand, obviously, to their administrations to be able to help them be able to bring together and get some good financial common sense goals within their city. So, well, I mean, obviously it helps you because your taxes keep on going
Well, that's
up
right.
in Bridgeport.
That's
So-
right. Well, the fact is that Hartford's in the news right now, as you know, Dom, and Hartford's been talking about the possibility of bankruptcy. It looks like the new budget bill might avert the need for them to go into bankruptcy. You know, they have a real cash flow problem, which the budget, I think, is going to take care of for them. But when you analyze the finances of major cities in the city of Connecticut, there's actually several cities that are in worse financial condition than Hartford. You know, Bridgeport, Waterbury, New Haven's even got its own challenges. They don't have the immediate cash flow problem that Hartford had and may or may not continue to have, but they've got huge unfunded pension, retiree health care obligations. In the case of Waterbury and Bridgeport, they have tax rates that are not competitive. You know, and so something has to be done to revitalize these cities because businesses, millennials, and empty nesters want vibrant cities, and it's critically important in order to improve our competitive posture.
I think, and this was the whole big thing over GE,
Right.
and that they, you know, having cities that are viable for the next generation, and they do. They think differently than what I was brought up with. Obviously, my idea of wanting to own a home and raise my family, they have different sets of circumstances, and I think they do want to go more towards the city. I think that's probably one of the reasons why Stamford is really doing so well on attracting new businesses and other things, is because they're right on the train line. It's a
Right.
shorter distance to New York.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
But it's got a vibrant downtown and it's attractive city.
Well, Stamford is doing better than most cities of that size in Connecticut, but Stamford's not been turned around. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Stamford has the highest mill rate percentage increase since 2012 of any city in the state of Connecticut. And secondly, Stamford has an over 27% vacancy rate in commercial property. And so Stamford's still got serious challenges. You're correct that its geographic location, being the close city in Connecticut to New York, is a real competitive advantage. But we still have to do more things in order to decongest our highways. We've got to do more things in order to improve, the safety, the timeliness, the reliability, and decongest even the trains than we have right now. Not just for Stamford, but frankly for all the coast.
So, I guess let's get to the turnaround.
Sure.
Because it's I think I took a look through your DaveWalker.com site, and I was going through sort of my checklist. I know in the most recent budget, and I don't know everything about this because
Nobody does.
Nobody does.
Other than maybe a few people in the legislature, yeah.
But I did see some things in there that you had.
Right.
We're talking about the spending cap.
Right.
I'm not sure what's still under the spending cap and what's not, because I know that they've had a spending cap since 1991. It was just never really kind of enforced, so to speak, in some ways.
Well, what happened, Dom, is in 1991, the citizens overwhelmingly ratified a constitutional spending cap. And part of that was to try to be able to constrain spending in light of the fact that an income tax was adopted. Keep in mind that income tax was supposed to be temporary. It's still with us, and it's much more burdensome today than it was back then. The spending cap was ratified by the voters of this state, but it was never defined. And the legislature, for the first time, has defined the spending cap. Now, I myself am still looking at the details. One thing I know for sure is it exempts pensions for 4 years, which is not acceptable. Look, having some cap is better than having no cap, don't get me wrong, and I think that's an accomplishment. I don't know how it treats retiree health care. We have $71 billion in unfunded pensions and retiree health care obligations at the state level, and billions more at the city level. We have to restructure those obligations in an equitable and sustainable way, or we cannot restore our competitive posture, and we cannot end up, creating a better future. It must be done. So yes, that was an accomplishment, but clearly more has to be done and will be done, in my view, in 2019.
Well, I know structurally, I mean, some of the things that have always bothered me within the pensions was the ability for people to put overtime,
Right.
And other things in. I think clearly it should just be about your basic salary that you make within that. And I understand the 3 top years. Usually, what people do is towards the end of their career, they work as hard as they possibly can in order to get those 3 top
Right.
years to be like their top money earners. And I don't consider that to be fair within the system. Take it for granted we have underfunded for many years, and I think that was always the governor's escape clause, and I'm talking multiple governors.
Sure.
Because
Now,
this
of
was
both
not
political
one.
parties, there's no question about that. Yeah.
In order to be able to not deal with the real underlying budgetary issues that come around, and I give Dan Malloy credit for this. He did fund and has actuarially funded a lot of these pension funds. How are we going to get these things under control? Because I do,
Sure.
I mean, that's the
Well,
big
as you
bogey.
know, Dom, the CBAC agreement, which is the State Employees Benefits and Compensation Agreement, was extended again back until 2027. In addition, the anti-layoff provision was extended and now goes for another 4 years. That was irresponsible, quite frankly. John Rowland, who was a Republican, started these long-term labor agreements. It was irresponsible. Dan Malloy has done it twice since. But the fact of the matter is that the state of Connecticut is a sovereign entity. And if you get a governor, and if you get a House, and if you get a Senate who are willing to legislate changes, we can override the CBAC agreement. And that's what we will do. If I'm governor, we will override the CBAC agreement. We will legislatively determine what benefits are going to be on pensions and retiree health care. We will rescind the anti-layoff provision for 4 years, because the fact is this state has grown too big, promised too much, and needs to restructure. We have promised benefits that are incredibly lucrative, much more lucrative than a Fortune 100 company, and we haven't funded those benefits. So the fact is, people think they're going to get those benefits. They're not going to get those benefits. What I want to do is I want to restructure those benefits in a fair and equitable fashion, and then make sure that we actually fund so that people can count on getting what they've been promised. That's not the case today. We'll make some changes on the pension side without cutting anybody's accrued pension benefit. We'll eliminate a lot of abuses, including counting anything other than base pay. You should count nothing but base pay. You shouldn't be able to double dip. You shouldn't be able to get more from a pension from the state of Connecticut than a private sector worker can get under a qualified plan, which we do, all right? But the big changes, frankly, are going to be made on the healthcare side, because we have promised something that is much, much greater than, frankly, any I've ever seen anywhere in the country. And I do consulting in this area. And so we're going to have to structure it so that our retirees get a benefit that's better than a Fortune 100 company, but bears more of a relationship for how long they've worked for the state as to how much we're going to help them be able to defray the cost of health care. I think we can save tens of billions of dollars, and in the end, people will still have a better benefit than a Fortune 100 company, and it will be more secure than it is today, and I think that's a win.
And I think that a lot of this, I know at the time that Governor Rowland negotiated this, I think 20 years was obviously too long a period of time, these were the sort of benefits that were more in line with back then. But I think the economics have changed drastically over since the time period that's occurred.
Well, government is a lag indicator, all right? I've been CEO of 3 federal agencies. 2 of those federal agencies are responsible for something called the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which is pensions and health care. The accounting and reporting treatment for pensions and health changed in the private sector in the late 1980s. There were dramatic and fundamental reforms to the nature of those plans, starting in the late 1980s. Those accounting and reporting changes have started to change in the public sector, and the public sector is 25 years behind. So they're just realizing now what the private sector realized 25 years ago. But you're also correct to say that we're in a very different economy now. Our growth rate nationally is anemic; it's not adequate. Our growth rate in Connecticut is worse. And we have to understand that we're not just competing with New York and Rhode Island and Massachusetts. We're competing with the entire country, and this is a big weight on our back that we're going to have to deal with, but in a fair and equitable fashion.
Now, I know we skipped because we jumped right into some of this
Jump
stuff.
right into the meat, right? I mean, sure.
Well,
No problem,
you got to bring everybody in, because this is what's important.
I had a large fundraiser last night in West Hartford, and took us over $250,000 of contributions of no more than $100 per person. And one of the questions that I got of many was, what are you going to do about the CBAC agreement? What are you going to do to be able to restructure our pension and health care plans? And this person asserted, and they are correct, that if you don't do that, you can't solve the problem. You must do that. And I'm committed to doing that. And quite frankly, nobody in the race, Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, whatever, has near the background and experience and proven track record in that area than I do. So that's one of the things that differentiates me from the field.
As I like to say sometimes, number one, you're not a lawyer.
Which is good. My brother is a lawyer, but we have too many lawyers in America.
But number two, your background is
It's perfectly
CPA.
suited for what we need right now. Right.
Why don't you tell me?
What's my
'cause-
background? Sure.
Well, I know you're one of 8 people that have run one office of government.
That's
So
right. That's right. That's right. Well, I'm a CPA by training, and I have got 40 plus years of leadership experience in the private sector, the public sector, and the not-for-profit sector. For example, I've run a worldwide line of business for the largest accounting consulting firm in the world. In that area, I was dealing with human capital strategy, which is people strategy, which includes organizational design and development, which includes change management, which includes executive comp, pensions, healthcare, a variety of other things. I've also been CEO of 5 organizations, 3 in the federal government, 2 in the executive branch that deal with pension and healthcare. And then I was the 7th Comptroller General of the United States, which is in English Auditor General, Chief Performance and Accountability Officer, CEO of something called the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I did that for 10 years. And then I've been CEO of 2 not-for-profits, one in New York, one in Connecticut, that focused on government transformation and fiscal responsibility. For the last 2 years, I've worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers as a senior strategic advisor, advising governors, federal cabinet officials and others, and foreign leaders on how do you improve economy, efficiency, effectiveness in government. How do you put your finances in order? Does that sound kind of familiar, Dom, as to what we might need here in Connecticut?
Something along those lines. Well, I mean, I also like the fact in one of your positions, you were reaching out and doing outreach to millennials.
That's correct.
To really to help them to get to understand, what's in it for them, because I mean, there's going to be a part in time where things are going to be handed over to the next generation. I mean, obviously, it goes in waves of things, and I think it's important for them to be involved and to understand what they're inheriting, the good and the bad.
Well, that's an issue at the federal, state, and local level, because the truth is that our fiscal policy, which is tax and spending policy, at the federal, state, and in too many cities in Connecticut, local level, are irresponsible and unsustainable. We are mortgaging the future of our kids and grandkids and future generations, and in many cases, these people don't even have a vote. That is irresponsible, it is unethical, it is immoral, and it must stop. And I've been fighting this fight for a number of years. And what I've decided is what I've known for a while, and that is you can't make the kinds of changes that need to be made unless you're in a position of power. You can't do it from the outside, you have to be on the inside. And there's only one chief executive officer at every level of government. And if the chief executive officer, which in the case of the state is the governor, if they don't get it, if they're not willing to tell the truth, talk about the tough choices, engaging the people, give them hope and show them a way forward, then you're going nowhere. I believe I'm uniquely qualified to do that, and I hope to have the opportunity to do it.
Now, one of the other things that I read in there, and I certainly believe in this, definitely at a federal level, but I know at a state level, you're talking about term limits for governor.
Yeah, we don't have term limits for governor. My view is we should have an 8-year term limit, and it should start with me. And in addition to that, I'm for 12-year term limits on state legislators, but I would be okay with not starting the clock ticking until after it's enacted into law. Look, our founders founded this great nation on the theory that people would come out of the real world, they would do temporary public service, and they would return to the real world. I'm a believer in that. I've spent 25 years in the private sector, 15 years in the public sector, 6 years in the not-for-profit sector. I consider myself very fortunate. I'm one of very few people that have run organizations in all 3 sectors of the economy. It gives me some life experiences that I think could be very helpful as governor. At the same point in time, I'm not a career politician. I don't want to be a career politician, and I don't think that's in the interest of our state or our country or even our municipalities to have people who are career politicians. You need to understand the way the world works. You need to not be in a bubble. You need to have to be subject to the same rules that you impose on others. So start outside, go in, go back out, and then eventually retire. That'd be nice. I know my wife would love me to do that, and she'd love us to be able to do it here in Connecticut, and so would I. Yeah.
I do understand that. I have a dream of retiring.
I have
sometime.
a dream. Yeah, I have a dream. Yeah. And I want to make sure it's not a mirage.
Yeah,
Right.
somewhere in
Yeah,
that. But no, I think it's important. You know what? I think at any level, honestly, I mean, when you walk in as a manager, your most effective time for change is usually the first like 3 years that you get like into an organization. It's where your eyes are fresh, on the target. You take that first year of like really growing to understand exactly what's going on and getting your hands like deep within it, and that like next 2-3 years is really where the change occurs, and you create that culture.
And let's talk about that for a second. I mean, first, in my view, there's a difference between being a leader and being a manager. Look, I can manage. I've managed plenty of things, but I'm a leader, and that's what we need right now. Okay, I also agree that there are every organization, whether it be a private sector organization, a public sector organization, or not-for-profit, has a life cycle. You need different kinds of leaders at different times in the life of that organization. When I became Comptroller General of the United States, CEO of the GAO, I competed with 60 people for selection for that job. At the time that I was selected, the Congress was not happy with the GAO. They had downsized it 40% in the 5 years before I came in, and they were going to downsize it another 25 to 40% if I didn't turn it around. So I came in as a change agent, and I dramatically transformed that organization to make it smaller, more efficient, more effective, more respected, to triple the return on investment, $55 billion in my last year alone, return on investment to the American people. But frankly, I had accomplished most of my objectives, 5 years before my term was supposed to end, so I left, all right? I've never stayed any place longer than 9.5 years. I think that's long enough, all right? In the case of public office, I think 8 years is long enough, quite frankly, especially if you're the chief executive. But you need to get off to a fast start, and that's why in the case of this election, I'm running an issue-based, solutions-oriented, referendum-style campaign. I want to go direct to the people and say, this is the truth. These are the tough choices we need to make. Give them some hope and show them a way forward, so that not only do you get elected, but you basically have a mandate for action so that we can get off to a very fast start in 2019, because the USS Connecticut is sinking. Make no mistake about it. It's not too late to save our ship of state. You've got to have the right captain as governor, but you've also got to have a good crew. And crew means other constitutional officers, the Senate, the House, because most of these tough choices, Dom, are going to have to be made through legislation. And I'm committed to do that, and I'm confident we can do it.
I think when I look at what happened over this last year, and I know sometimes I look at it slightly different than other people do. I know some people get up in arms about this person took this vote, this person took this vote, and I almost feel like it's kabuki. It's like you're watching a play like go out. But at the end of the day, the thing that I felt was most important was the leaders in the legislature got aside. They took their titles off at the door.
They talked to each other.
And they talked to each other.
Yeah.
And they talked to each other about policy. It was not about strictly about line items and I want this or you want this. It was the policy that's going to really move Connecticut forward. And to a person, everybody that I really feel comfortable with, I know that that's what they wanted the legislature to do.
And that's what they're supposed to do. The fact of the matter is that, this budget was not perfect. No budget is perfect, all right? No. The fact that it was passed on a bipartisan basis by a supermajority vote that would override a governor's veto if the governor had decided to do that, which he didn't, thankfully. Nope. That's a historic accomplishment in recent years. The fact that they included a number of systemic reforms, at least the first step towards those systemic reforms with regard to prevailing wage, with regard to the spending cap, with regard to the length of of contracts with regard to legislature having to approve those contracts.
Yep.
Those are positive steps, all right? At the same point in time, understand this. The Office of Fiscal Analysis has said that after this 2-year period, which is supposed to be balanced, okay, we'll see.
Yeah, I know.
I'm a person of faith. I hope so. But $1.9 billion deficit in the year after this, $2.6 billion deficit the year after that, $3.1 billion deficit the year after that. All right, that's because the next governor has to take the heat to be able to lead the way to make the type of structural reforms that people have been kicking the can down the road too long. Time is up. It's time to make those tough choices.
I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that your CBAC agreement, and
that's number one. It's not the only thing.
And
That's number one.
And that had to do with they get no increases for the first 2 years, but then it's like they come in a wave afterwards. So I mean that's the difficulty of dealing with any union contract is I know for instance the program that I work under, I've been involved with since 1999 or 2000 with brain injury. We have gotten a total increase of 4% since the year 2000.
Well, here's what's
and that's and I look at some of the things that and the economy and with the rate of inflation, I don't think that you can automatically assume certain things that went on in the past.
That's correct. Well, first, I'm a big believer in benchmarking. You don't know how good or bad you have it unless you compare it to somebody else, right? So let's start off with a few stats. If you benchmark the financial condition of the state of Connecticut against the other 50 states, which I do for PricewaterhouseCoopers every year, we are number 47 out of 50. New Jersey's 50, Kentucky's 49, Illinois is 48, we're number 47. There's a huge gap between number 47 and everybody else, all right? And that considers the relative wealth of this state. We're bottom 5 in competitive posture in virtually every ranking you see. We're not business friendly, which is one of the things Amazon wanted, by the way, and wants. And we're one of the few states in the union that actually have a declining population. All right, so that's the facts. All right. At the same point in time, we have a lot of positives about the state of Connecticut that if we can put our finances in order, because if you don't put your finances in order, sophisticated investors, CEOs, boards of directors are not going to invest and expand in this state. You must put your finances in order, and that's what I'm prepared to do. And CBAC is the number one thing, but it's not the only thing that has to be done. Our welfare system is the most generous in America. It's full of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. We're one of the few states that compete with the not-for-profit sector to provide social services. We provide less services with less quality for much higher cost. What people don't understand is you analyze the budget, over 50% of the budget is state employee compensation and benefits, counting retirees, benefits, all right? An increasing percentage of retirees don't live in Connecticut anymore. They earn their money here and then they move out of the state, right? And it's not just state workers that are moving out of the state, right? So look, here's the good news. We can solve this problem. If you get a governor who's willing to take the heat and lead, if you get a legislature who are willing to buy in to an action plan, on my website, which you've looked at, davewalkerct.com, there's Dave's Commitments to Connecticut, which is a framework for an action plan. And I'm pulling together a fiscal plan now that we have a budget, which
now you know where the numbers are falling.
Now I know where the numbers are, so at least you got a baseline to deal with, right? We can do this. But 2018 may be our last chance to save our state from further decline. And once we put our finances in order, we can sell what we have to sell, and we have quite a bit to sell.
We do. I mean, obviously proximity. We have Long Island Sound. We have like excellent school systems.
We have one of the best, if not the best, quality of lives in the country.
Yep.
We have 4 distinct seasons, but none of them are too harsh. We have a great geographic area. We have good education systems for most, for most of the towns. We have some great higher educational institutions. Okay, we have a number of things going for us, but you have to put your finances in order first. And let's give an example, Amazon. You know, we got a lot of people out there politically posturing going after Amazon. You know, reading is fundamental. Let me just give you 3 examples of criteria that Amazon had that we don't pass with a straight face test. Number 1, they want a business-friendly state. I just told you that we were ranked bottom 5 with every major ranking that's out there. Secondly, they want a city with at least 1 million people. Our largest city I live in, it's 147,000. It's called Bridgeport. And thirdly, they want to be within 45 minutes of a major international airport by surface, not by helicopter. Maybe Stanford early Sunday morning to JFK. That's about it, right?
Yeah.
And so let's get serious. You know, if we put our finances in order, we make some of these tough choices, we can go after all kinds of companies. But unless and until we do that, we're not in a position to sell this state with a straight face.
Well, I know one of the great things about the city that I live in, we're actually we're a growing community. We've had over 400 new businesses start or expand every year for the last 3 years. We've actually dropped our tax rate and probably invested more in infrastructure, roads, and everything else that there is.
What's your mill rate now, roughly, right now, Don?
You're going to get me out of the
Oh,
top
never
of my
mind.
head.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. Well, it's competitive, obviously. For all of that to happen,
it's gone down.
And for all that to happen,
Right.
it's competitive.
But what it did do
Yeah.
was it shifted, because our grand list expanded with all the new businesses in, that our residential like taxes were able to go down, and we were able to do more, even though the governor was constantly, you know, hanging us with the noose because we have good finances and we got a AAA bond rating.
We'll understand this, okay, several things on that. Number 1, the job of a municipal leader, okay, is to grow the tax base faster than the budget. If you don't grow the tax base faster than the budget, simple math will say your taxes will go up forever, right? It sounds like that your town has done that. My town has done the opposite. The budget is going up much faster than the tax base, and therefore you have to have a mechanism to allow those cities to restructure their finances, and we have to target economic development into those troubled cities, because you can't have a great state and have deteriorating cities. It just won't work in today's time. But don't take too much comfort in what the rating agencies say, because let me tell you this, they do a terrible job with regard to analyzing municipal finance. What they care about is one thing: can you make your bond payments for 3 years, maybe 5 years? They don't care if you've got a terrible school system. They don't care if your streets aren't safe. They don't care if you're taxing people out of their homes. They don't care if your infrastructure is falling apart. They don't care. Look what happened to Hartford. How many downgrades they've had in the last year when people started talking about the possibility of bankruptcy, all right? So, look, I'm an expert in financial analysis. I'm an expert in government transformation and financial restructuring. Let me tell you, don't go by what the rating agencies say. Who pays them? They're paid by the people that they're giving a rating on. There's a fundamental conflict of interest. Now, they do a very good job, I think, with regard to private sector entities. But you have to understand, you know, what they're trying to accomplish. And in our case, Connecticut and many municipalities, we have serious structural problems that don't manifest themselves, you know, until after the 3-year horizon, and in fact get exponentially worse after the 3-year horizon. That's where you've got to have leadership. That's why you got to have a plan of action, and that's why we got to do it sooner rather than later.
So now, how do we become more business friendly? Because I guess it always bothers me every time that I look that it's like we have to pay off some entity or somebody to either stay in the state or to come into the state. And I know we're competing against 50 other states.
We are, and you're right. And a lot of people don't realize, well, 49 other states.
49 other
Puerto
states.
Rico's not in yet.
No.
And by the way, they're in much worse shape than we are. So
yes.
Understand that. Look, you know, the fact is that I've met with top leaders at GE, top leaders at Aetna, top leaders with a number of other companies to talk to them about why did they decide what their what they did decide, or what are they thinking about doing for the future. And in most cases, one of the top things they talk about is the fact that, look, there's no meaningful, constructive, ongoing working relationship between the governor and the business community. None, all right? And the state is the second most regulated state in the union, and that has a cost to business, it has a cost to consumers. You know, and so what you have to do is you have to have a governor that understands. If you like jobs, you got to be pro-business, because business is the one that creates jobs. Government can either be a facilitator to creating jobs, or it can be an inhibitor to creating jobs. The way that Connecticut is right now, it's an inhibitor. It's a liability, all right? So the governor has to make this a top priority. We have to look at our regulatory structure and do deregulation while maintaining essential consumer environmental protections. We have to make our tax system more competitive, both on the corporate side as well as on the individual side. We have to do something about our infrastructure. We've got to revitalize our cities. These are the things that I hear from top business executives that we have to do, all right? And they're an integral part of Dave's commitments to Connecticut, all right? An integral part. You can't bribe people to stay here, all right?
That's like I said, that's one of the things that always bothers me.
Because let me tell you what happens, Dom. What happens is you give somebody an incentive for 5 years, 7 years, and those incentives expire, right? And then they look and say, all right, we're not competitive with regard to taxes. We're not competitive with regard to regulations. We've got these huge unfunded obligations that represent future tax increases and or decline in public services, or both over time. We can't get around the city, the state, all right? You know, come on. I mean, these people aren't stupid. And so it's time to recognize that reality and take action accordingly.
Well, I think you're also making a choice over which companies that you have come in. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love ESPN, but it's in a market and a position where cable companies, people are pulling their plug on them and looking at other platforms as technology changes. They're having, you know, their own sets of difficulties. So even when you invest in some of these things, it's not generally a guarantee. I take difference over Sikorsky. I think that was that's
also a national security issue.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we have way more than our fair share of, national security contractors in our state. We want to keep it that way. All right. And you got to also understand that we have the highest electric rates of any of the 48 states, all right? Many people don't understand that, but it's true. I pay double or more per kilowatt hour for electricity here than I did in Northern Virginia. There's no good reason for that, all right? And one of the things that has to happen is that we need an investigation immediately as to why that's the case and what needs to be done to change that. Because you're not going to get energy-intensive manufacturing in this state unless we do something about those rates. Now, in the case of defense contractors, if you got a cost-plus contract, you can pass it on to the taxpayer, right? But if you're not a defense contractor, you know, you've got to compete, and we got to do something about it.
Well, I know. I was just reading this morning about the rates that are going up for both UI and Northeast Utilities.
Eversource. Yeah.
Eversource.
They want a 26% rate increase? You got to be kidding me.
Yep.
You know, I mean, look, as I said, benchmarking is important. I'm fortunate. I've lived in 7 states, plus the District of Columbia. I've traveled to all 50. I've traveled to 100 countries. I do research and analysis as part of my profession, right? And you know, there's no good reason that we're paying what we are. You know, we don't generate enough electricity. We buy it on the spot market. We've got brokers that are controlling this market that are getting rich, and it's costing us money. That's just one of many examples of where we're going to have to
I am lucky enough that about two years ago I got my solar installation.
So you're selling back to the grid?
I sell back to the grid. I actually, well, I mean, you know what? It helps the electrical companies too,
sure,
because you know what? They don't have to send electricity over a long line. If I'm overproducing on any given day, it's going right to my neighbor.
No, that's right. That's right.
And it's so it helps the integrity of the electrical grid. Now I had a whole 5, 6 year plan. It started with cutting certain trees down, and then I got the through the wall high efficiency heat pumps,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then the last part was.
So you're doing your part.
Yeah, well, no, I waited around for the right opportunity. They did the Green Bank, and I know this is one of the
sure.
things that I feel unfortunate that they kind of cut money from in this whole process, because that's a whole industry.
Yeah, no doubt. And one of the things you talked about, which is important, I like ESPN too. Okay. But the fact is, we have to be making our decisions based upon where the economy is and where the economy is going.
Yep.
Based upon the future, not the past. And nobody knows with great certainty, other than God, what the future holds, and God's not telling us. So we have to do a better job, and we need to make sure that when we're making these, providing economic incentives, they make economic sense. I see situations where towns are providing economic incentives for multifamily housing, which is a money loser, because they're going to use the school system, right? It's one thing to provide economic incentives for an employer who's going to actually create new employment, and the people may or may not end up using the school system. One of the reasons that Florida doesn't have an income tax, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons is they have a disproportionate number of retirees who don't use the school system, all right? And candidly, Connecticut, for a lot of reasons, ought to be one of the best places in the country for somebody to retire. But we don't have a cap on property taxes. We tax Social Security income. We have,
I think some of those were changed in this last budget. I know within that. I mean, I don't know the specific
a little
numbers.
bit was changed, not enough.
Yes.
And I think we need to give credit where credit was due. There was some progress on the estate tax. The estate tax is one of the reasons you have a lot of wealthy people leaving here. It costs us money. It costs us money because people leave before they would otherwise leave, and some people leave that otherwise wouldn't leave.
Or
but
people leave for 183 days instead.
Well, that's right. That's right. That's right. And 183 days plus a few other tests.
Yep.
And I've had a number of people, quite frankly, tell me that if this race doesn't go the way that they think it needs to go, they will be leaving. On the other hand, I've also had people tell me who have already left that if we can make some of the changes that I'm talking about, they'll come back, because this is a beautiful state with a proud history, with a lot going for it. We can create a better future.
I know, and I would probably go past your home because I do a lot of boating, obviously.
I wish I had a boat. Oh, it's better to have a friend with a boat.
There you go. Friend with a boat is always better.
Yeah.
But there's no better natural resource than Long Island Sound.
Yeah. And I live right on the water, on a harbor overlooking Long Island Sound. So, I know that climate change is real, and I'm on the front lines of the potential implication with regard to rising water lines and things of that nature. Yeah.
And I know for us as a community, I mean, I know growing up here 40 years ago, I mean, you didn't really want to go swim too much in Long Island Sound. I think
it's cleaned up quite a bit.
Investing in the water treatment plants and other things, and getting people to have a better understanding of how our environmental impact.
And we're seeing a lot more wildlife. I see it, at my home, in my neighborhood, or whatever. A lot more wildlife. Yeah.
So, what do you see as far as transportation structure that we need to like really focus in on? And I know there's some massive projects as far as like bridges, and there's been discussions of tunnels underneath the Hartford River and all kinds of things. Where do you see the priorities, so to speak?
Our infrastructure is terrible. Okay, 95 is a parking lot. The Merritt is a park. And a lot of our other surface transportation systems are inadequate. Our Metro North, which goes along the coast, it takes longer, less safe, less reliable, more crowded today to get to New York City than it did 30 years ago. That's unacceptable, okay? So I think what we have to do is recognize we've got to invest in infrastructure. We've raided all the trust funds. When I say we, wasn't me.
No.
They've raided all the trust funds, and it's going to take money to be able to get this done. I was a Reagan, Bush 41, and Clinton presidential appointee. Reagan wanted to try to hold taxes as low as possible, and so do I. But he also recognized that sometimes you have to make investments, and when you make investments and it costs money, then you ought to try to attach that to the people who benefit. So we're going to have, in my view, electronic tolls, all right, at the borders. We're going to have to get the federal government's permission for that. But what I want to do is I want to structure it in a way that the burden is imposed entirely or at a minimum overwhelmingly on out-of-state tags. And there's a way to do that. You can't differentiate on who you're charging under the U.S. Constitution, but we have something called an auto tax, which they didn't eliminate. And you can give a credit on the auto tax if you have a Connecticut plate. We need to look to accelerate service on Metro North. We need to look at alternative forms of transportation, such as high-speed ferries, water ferries, which exist in other parts of the world. And we need to look to high-speed rail from New York to Hartford, Hartford to Boston. You can't go high-speed along the coast. You can go higher speed, but not high-speed. So those are some of the things that we need to do, but it's going to take money. We have to recognize that in some circumstances, those who benefit may have to pay, but we ought to place a burden on people who don't live here or using our roads and using our transportation system.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I always looked at is every state around us. I mean, you go down the New Jersey Turnpike, you're you know, if you're going over the GW Bridge on top of that, you're talking like $20-30.
I go to Washington. We have a secondary residence in Alexandria, Virginia, which is right across the river from Washington, and we try to go down there every month or two, and so I'm very familiar with that. And I also know that nobody with half a brain is going to buy gas in Connecticut, but they're going through here, so we're not getting their revenues by buying gas. All right,
you're not.
And so they're deteriorating our infrastructure. They're benefiting from our infrastructure. They're not paying anything for it. Those days are over. We've got to do something about it.
Well, and I think if you look at with a gas tax, I mean, obviously, as people change over to electric vehicles,
it's
and
a declining revenue
more,
source.
It gets diminishing returns
Right.
over a period of time.
I mean, I see Teslas on the road all the time. Okay, hybrid vehicles and things of that nature. And there are only going to be more as time goes on.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I think obviously investing in our infrastructure is probably one of the best things that we could do, and I think now is the time. I know I had a friend of mine on who's going to be running for Congress, and he looks at it as, you know, the bridge over New Haven was, you know, started the design, you know, everything else, the development was gone 30 years ago.
Right.
We need to look at like what's the next big infrastructure project that's going to carry us through 30 years from now.
Well, I co-chaired a national infrastructure study that was funded by the Carnegie Endowment with former U.S. Senator Bill Bradley and former Governor Tom Ridge, and we came up with a number of ideas of what needs to be done. Frankly, I think, real quickly to the federal thing, I think we need comprehensive tax reform, and I think we need infrastructure investment. If we combine those two things, we could get bipartisan support for something that would be a double plus. And I'm hoping ultimately that's what happens. But we have to take care of our own right now. And you know, we've got to do our own tax reform, we've got to do our own infrastructure investment. But in order to be able to generate the revenues, we're going to have to deal with our comp and benefits, we're going to have to look at our welfare system, we're going to have to right-size government, and in selected circumstances, we're going to have user fees where we end up imposing the burden overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, on out-of-state tax.
And I know one of the things that they put in the budget and these are the type of things that I agree with. Certainly, talking about like the state parks, putting in the fee for on your auto tag registration, and then leaving them, you know, open to every state resident.
Right.
I think that's,
and out of state ought to pay more.
Right. And that's something where, okay, now you don't have to have a guard at a guard shack, pay him, you know, to collect on something that's unpopular with people.
And that's where the tolls used to be. I mean, you know, we had that terrible accident on I-95, which was around Fairfield before I lived in the state, and, you know, tragic deaths, if you will. But, you know, that's the past. I mean, we need to look forward. I mean,
well, they can do them by tags.
I know they can. They do it in New York.
I know. I know Bill Finch, who used to be around here. Yeah, I got over the new bridge.
Yeah.
and you know
I've been over a
send
few
it,
times, too.
They send
Yeah.
it to you in the mail if you don't have the pass.
The
on
easy
it.
pass, right.
You know, and so it's nonstop. It's not like the old days where you had to like go dig for the change, throw it in the machine, and
Well, you know, we're known as the land of steady habits, among other things. We're really more the land of bad habits. I mean, we need to learn from others, okay, and we need to focus on the future, and that's what I'm prepared to do.
so I know we got five or 10 minutes.
Sure.
I know we've been talking about all your stuff actually 5 minutes. So I give the floor out to the 5 minutes for you to talk directly to the people.
Sure.
I know about what you see and
Thanks, Don.
what you're doing for your campaign.
Well, look, I mean, the bottom line is this. I love Connecticut. My wife loves Connecticut. We chose Connecticut 8 years ago. We'd like to retire here, but major changes are needed in order for us to be able to do that, and frankly, for others to be able to do that too. We've gone from a top 5 state to a bottom 5 state in the last 30 years. We've already talked about our financial condition, migration patterns, competitive posture. I'm focused like a laser on 3 things. What do we need to do to increase economic growth and job opportunities? What do we need to do to restore integrity and accountability in government? And what do we need to do to put our finances in order? If you don't deal with those 3 things, frankly, everybody will suffer to differing degrees over time. And frankly, the people that are less well off will suffer to the greatest. You know, it's not just about turning around the state. It's also about revitalizing our cities. I think that's critically important. I think I am uniquely positioned to do what needs to be done at this point in time, you know, for the state of Connecticut. There's a number of people running. There's a number of good people, you know. But as I said to you before, you know, I think different organizations need different kind of leaders at different points in time in their history. And I think right now what Connecticut needs, it needs a proven turnaround specialist with financial restructuring experience. And that's me. I'm the only candidate in the race with that. At the same point in time, the governor can't do it all. All right? If you don't have the right governor, you're not going to be successful. On the other hand, you need to have other constitutional officers. You need to have a Senate. You need to have a House that will work with the governor to help make these tough choices and create a better future. I believe we can do it. If I'm fortunate enough to be the next governor, I will do what it takes to turn this state around, to revitalize the cities, and to create a better future. There's no reason we can't be a top state again. But to do it, we got to be honest, and we got to make tough choices. And we need to do it soon, because time's not working in our favor.
As they say, a change agent is definitely what we needed at this time.
We need a change agent, but with a different style than Donald Trump.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you for differentiating between that.
Yes. I do tweet, but I don't tweet at 3 a.m. And
No.
and my tweets are substantive. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Dave, it was my
pleasure.
pleasure to have you on.
Please be with you, Dom. Thank you very much.
And I'm glad you're in the race, and I'm glad I got to meet you a long ways back. I know we keep running each other up at the legislature from time to time, but I was happy to sit down and have the real substantive conversation that we did.
Thanks, and good luck to you in your race.
Well,
tomorrow.
like I said, we'll find out. We'll find out next time I come on here. I think in a couple of weeks or next week I have Gail Lavielle coming on. And she's going to helpfully. She's going to help us unwind what happened in the budget, and we're going to be able to talk further. And then I believe after that, I got Joe Markley coming on as we're doing our lieutenant governor.
Well, let's
talk.
make sure everybody votes.
That's the most
Very
important
important.
thing. Most important. So with that, you can run the streets.